Welcome back for another video, guys. Today we're talking about Rocket Lab's quarterly earnings call that was just completed earlier tonight. I listened to the whole thing and combed through it for any tidbits of information I thought might be especially pertinent or useful. Always a good idea to listen to the earnings call of any company you own, especially if it's a large position. You want to listen to the tone of the call. If the CEO and management team is feeling confident, the trend things are going. There's a lot more you can pick up on these things than just what you can see in the presentation. So it's always a good idea to listen into the whole thing. But I have picked out some bits of information for you that I think will be helpful. So let's jump on over to it. Okay, so here's the headline numbers. We have a GAAP EPS of -6 cents per share, which misses estimates by 1 cent per share. May not seem like a lot, but obviously on a percentage basis, that's a decent amount. Although at this point, they're not really looking at GAAP EPS because they're still growing. In terms of revenue, which is probably more important right now, we have a beat by about 0.85 million. So the revenue was 40.7 million, beats by a little under 1 million. So that's good to see. Market seems to be pretty happy with these results so far, and the after hours were up almost 3%. And it's a small company, so there's not too much after hours trading, but still good to see. Now, in terms of the presentation, we only had 2 launches this quarter, which is something we knew about, but it was a little disappointing. There was one launch that was supposed to happen and end up getting pushed back, so potentially good for next quarter in terms of having better earnings, but definitely had an impact on lower revenue for the launch business, at least in terms of this quarter. A little bit disappointing, but I mean, not unexpected. We obviously all know if a launch happens or not. We can see it. It's not something that's like a big surprise at the end of the quarter. More recently, though, Electron has reached a launch cadence of once a month. So there's been 3 Electron launches successfully in the last 9 weeks, which is picking up the cadence very good because we do want this cadence to increase. More launches is more revenue. We need to see that growth continuing to increase. Although I have to say I am pretty impressed by their other lines of business. I really didn't see it coming, but it's good to see that the launch cadence is continuing to grow. It's going to be supported by a new launch pad, and they've had their first new launch at a new launch pad as well. Order backlog grew. So in Q4 of 2021, they had $241 million in order backlog. In Q1 of 2022, so that's less than a year later, that's just a quarter later, actually, they had $546 million in order backlog. And then a little bit later, just until we're reporting, we now have $551 million in order backlog. So it's great to see that the order backlog's piling up. They seem to have plenty of demand for their products, at least right now. So as I mentioned before, they successfully launched their first Electron rocket from the new launch pad down in New Zealand, which will bolster their capability as well as realize economies of scale because they can use some of the same infrastructure there, not run into more problems with permits and things of that nature in New Zealand. The third launch pad in Virginia is going to be operational in Q4 of 2022, barring any setbacks. Just to dive a bit deeper into the financials here. So as we saw, the GAAP EPS missed by 1 cent. Revenue was a beat by a little under $1 million. Total revenue was $40.7 million. This represents a 48% quarter-on-quarter revenue growth, which is fantastic. You can see the big growth is in space systems, not launches. We've actually, our launches in Q1 decreased significantly, which we don't expect to see going forward. So that's actually kind of bullish for the next few quarters, really. The fact that the space systems growth was so significant, obviously partially due to some acquisitions they've made, and the launches should continue to pick up throughout the end of the year, as we're now expecting a 1 per month launch rate. So revenue and gross margin, year over year increase is 124%, which is great as well, mostly driven, as we can see, by the space system revenue. It's great to see those different lines of income streaming in, not just the rocket launches, although they're the most exciting to watch. Space systems and manufacturing of satellites is extremely important. Components can be very profitable as well. We're seeing a 1,873% year over year increase for space systems, which I know sounds crazy, and it is crazy, but you have to remember that it's growing from basically nothing. So that's not something that's going to be sustained, but we do still hope to see space system growth in the future. Launch services generated 6.6 million, which is obviously disappointing, but that was impacted by delayed launch pushed into Q2. So we should be having that launch in this quarter, and it'll help this quarter's revenue. Operating expenses are growing as well. This is due to acquisitions as well as increase in SG&A and R&D related to the new Neutron rocket. Not really unexpected for a growth company to have their operating expenses increase like this, but it's something you do want to keep an eye on. I do have to say, though, they've done a great job of making sure they get good value for their money and not overspending and just allowing their expenses to get out of control like some other companies I've seen. So here we get the looking forward financial outlook. Q2 of 2022, so this is a coming quarter. They expect a revenue of 51 to 54 million, planning 3 launches for the quarter, which would be 1 per month, and we expect launch services revenue of approximately 19 million, which is obviously significantly more than the 6 and whatever it was for the current quarter, so that'll return to more of a normal level. Space systems revenue looking at 32 to 35 million. So that 51 million represents a quarter-over-quarter growth of 19% for Q2, which is great because we've already had quarter-over-quarter growth for Q1. So the growth is looking to continue. Gross margins should also improve because they were impacted by fewer launches. You know, you're still paying for all the same facilities, you're just launching less, so that was a real drag on Q1, as well as the term of the product mix was a little worse in Q1 as well. In terms of Q2, operating expenses are expected to come in at around 39 to 41 million. Non-GAAP operating expenses 23 to 25. So still not making money as of yet. We don't expect them to turn a profit for quite a while. It's sort of something going into this company. Is they're growing rapidly. They're investing in the future. They're investing in new products. Their new Neutron rocket, and they're investing in the future, and they're not going to turn a profit as of yet. So all to be expected there. I just took some other notes from the earnings call as I was listening in. I was happy to hear that gross margin improvement is expected. Operating expenses are also expected to increase, as we know, but you do want to hear that gross margins are improving as we add more launches and make more acquisitions. In terms of space systems, is really the most exciting part of this earnings call. Really, space systems in the past has taken a backseat to me to launches. It was really what got me excited about the company, got me interested in it. But space systems is kind of like the the hidden gem, I guess you might say, that a lot of people don't even realize exists. So they're expecting their margins to increase over the long term to the low to mid 50s, which is similar to what launch margins are. Their acquisition of Solero was a bit of a drag, and those margins on the Solero company are a bit lower, probably only around 30%. So that's a bit of a drag, but overall, as the rest of their business increases, they expect that impact to lessen. The value per launch is around 8 million per launch these days. Used to be around 5 million, so nice to see they have some pricing power there. They're able to increase prices and no loss to customers. Really interesting to hear Peter Beck talk about the condition of the Electron stage that was recovered from their recent launch. It was caught from a helicopter, then they dropped it, and they recovered it from the ocean, inspected the rocket. Apparently, the condition is absolutely fantastic, so that bodes extremely well for future launches. I'm going to play some clips from the earnings call of the pertinent things that I thought were exciting, so we'll hear about that. There's a big impact in the market right now about Russia and the Ukraine conflict. Obviously, Russia's kind of exited the launch market. Nobody's willing to purchase Soyuz or Proton launches from them. They're creating a hole in the market that Electron can't address so much because of the size of the rocket and the market thereafter. But it's a big potential opportunity for Neutron going forward. So they're looking at that and potentially getting more customers from that in the future. Discussion on supply chain, which has been a big issue for basically every company out there right now. Every company is having massive supply chain problems, not being able to produce as much product as they need to. But Rocket Lab is actually doing pretty well here. So they have an advantage by being extremely highly integrated. They've never had to delay a launch or a satellite due to supply chain issues. They have had no major product disruptions. They've managed their supply chain extremely well, and they don't see it being a major problem going forward either. There were recent rumors that 3 Neutron rockets could be ready by 2024, but the company's not going to comment on that. I don't think they're not ready to talk about when Neutrons will be ready. It's just way too soon. They were asked when the next launch catch attempt will be. They said it won't be long. They won't commit to which one it will be yet. They're not going to say if it's the next one or the one after the next, but they say it won't be very long, which is good to see. I'm excited to see the first catch that's brought back to shore and doesn't take a swim in the ocean. Potentially the first rocket to be reused could be very exciting. They would like to speed up Neutron as much as possible, obviously, but there's no easy way to do that, really. So they were asked, could you spend more money, speed up Neutron development, seeing as how there's this hole in the rocket industry market from the Russian rockets. They say they're going as fast as they can. Even if they spend a ton more money, it's not a problem that just throwing money at can fix. They're already going as fast as they can on Neutron. Now let's look at a few clips of interesting moments from the earning call.
Following up on maybe some of the earlier discussion around helicopter recovery, any sense, I guess, standing here today of how long before Electron boosters are regularly recovered in this fashion? And is the plan to recover all Electron boosters in this way eventually, or does helicopter retrieval make sense only under certain conditions? Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So we sort of think around about 50% of Electron missions will be viable for recovery, and that's not just from a helicopter standpoint operationally, but it's also from a mission standpoint. So one of the challenges with a small rocket is that that there's very tight margins. So some missions require all of the performance of Electron, which don't really allow for the addition of extra mass for usability hardware. I mean, we've got the burden down fairly low, sort of 10 to 15% reduction in a payload, which is extraordinarily low. But nevertheless, a number of missions require that extra performance. So we're sort of thinking around about 50% of missions will be eligible for being reusable and recovered.
This one was interesting to hear. Peter Beck talking about how the Electron rocket will only be able to be reused about 50% of the time. That's due to the payload requirements for some of their missions being a little heavier and not being able to bring it back properly. A bit of a disappointment there. I'm not sure if he's mentioned that before anywhere else or if this is new information. Obviously, the more they can reuse, the better. So only 50%. Not as good as 100%, obviously, but still a massive improvement in terms of margins if you're able to reuse 50% of your rockets.
Got it. And then maybe one last one for me. On the recapture of the Electron stage, did that change your thinking at all in terms of the economic impact of reusability? Is it turning out better than you thought, worse than you thought, or about the same as you thought now that you've got a little more data and some more experience with it?
Well, at the end of the day, the proof will be in the pudding, and the condition that we recovered the stage, even though we recovered out of the ocean, which is less than ideal, was really extraordinarily good. All of the kind of iterations that we've been making over previous flights had all really paid huge dividends. And to give the sense of when it's recovered from a helicopter, the helicopter costs around about $5,000 an hour to operate. If you've got it out there for 4 hours or more, it's an incredibly cost-effective way to go back and bring a stage which represents the vast majority of the cost of a launch vehicle. I mean, the economics are just awesome. Now, the true economics will be born out of how much of the refurbishment cycle does that cost. But I mean, for $20,000 worth of helicopter time, to get back full engine sets and whole tanks. I mean, it really is really wonderful.
Overall, I thought it was a pretty good quarter, pretty good earnings call. The management team seems confident. The space systems line of business has been massively expanding. You love to see that linear integration in the business. It's not just all about the launches. It was a little weaker of a quarter for launch, but that will change going forward. I was a little disappointed to hear that only 50% of their Electron rockets will be able to be reused depending on the mission profile, mass of the satellite and stuff like that, but it's still a big game changer going forward. Neutron's on track, and it was a bit of a beat for revenue. So good quarter all around, and I hope you found this useful. Thanks for watching. Bye.